Hey, welcome to our second Film Fanatics Minisode. I'm Dan, and soon joining me in discussion will be my weekly co-hosts Justin and Joe. Listeners, you may not know this, but from time to time, the three of us will discuss a movie for much longer when we record than what you hear when you listen to the show. In an effort to keep the show more concise, I try to edit our reviews and discussions down to about 10 to 12 minutes per movie, but sometimes we will talk 18 minutes about a film, and only the best stuff makes the podcast. Well, last week we went for 25 minutes on The Amazing Spiderman, a series that especially Justin and Joe have gone back and forth about long before Film Fanatics even existed. It's the longest we've discussed one film while recording before I called time and moved to the next movie. And we could have gone another 20 minutes easily as well. If you listened to last week's episode, you only heard about half of the discussion. So for our second minisode, please enjoy the producer's cut, if you will, of The Amazing Spider-Man. This is a 2012 reboot of the franchise with another origin film, this one directed by Mark Webb. Andrew Garfield takes over the Spidey character, Emma Stone is Gwen Stacy, Rhys Ifans as Dr. Curtis Connors, Dennis Leary is Gwen's father and captain of the police force, and the film also includes Martin Sheen and Sally Field as Uncle Ben and Aunt May. In this first installment of the new series, Peter Parker gets bitten by a genetically altered spider and, of course, becomes Spider-Man, all the while trying to romance Gwen, avoid her father, and save New York City, and indeed the world, from the Lizard. And when this film was originally announced, there was a collective why worldwide, as it had been only a decade since the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film. I was with them, but then I saw the film. Much like the difference between Tim Burton and Christopher Nolan's visions for Batman and Gotham City, Webb and Raimi have two different styles and are telling two different stories. And, as comic book fans know, the Amazing series is a separate one from the original series and has its own universe. I'm a fan of the first two Raimi films in the trilogy, and Spider-Man 2 of his is still my favorite of any Spider-Man film overall. But as we discussed earlier this summer with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, this first one is surprisingly good. Tobey Maguire and Garfield each bring their own take to the superhero, but Garfield's got a more larger-than-life take on him, and it really works in these films. This is more a grown-up series, akin to Nolan's Batman, and less cartoony. Now, Joe should have led this, but as we do our triple feature, one of us leads one of each, and Joe's got the old classic with Transformers. So I'm going to hand things over to him and leave Spider-Man with an A-. Oh. Joe?
All right, The Amazing Spider-Man. This film is another interpretation of Marvel's flagship character. The grittier, more down-to-earth version is more aligned with the more recent version of the character from the past couple decades. Garfield's Peter Parker is less of an old, nerdy cliche than Stan Lee's original comics, and a bit more of a universal version of the character. He's smart, but not overly brainy. He's sensitive without being overly whiny, and he does, most importantly, have Peter's sense of humor. The plot is heavily influenced by the Ultimate Comics, which is a more updated version of the young Peter, and considered by many to have contained some of the character's best stories. This includes his parents' disappearance and their connection to Osborn, as well as classic versions of the characters, such as Lizard and Captain Stacy making an appearance, so it's kind of a good combination of both worlds. Emma Stone also is one of the best versions of Gwen Stacy that I've ever seen, which is actually, believe it or not, fairly complex, believable, adds to the plot, and has some really good chemistry with the lead. The romance is one of the strongest elements and leads well into the sequel. The cast in general is great. You know, Martin Sheen, Sally Field, we got some great ones there. I mean, really great picks there. I think Webb really knows how to utilize music well here due to his background. He's got some good experience, and he has some fairly close-cut, editing or good camera work. And for the most part, it does make some decent action scenes. This is a strong version, though it's not without its problems. You can tell the writers had a hard time deciding what to reveal and when, and some elements are left kind of unexplained, due to a reliance on hope for future sequels, no doubt, making this one suffer a little bit as a standalone film. Kurt Connors, though an interesting character, is a bit underdeveloped. Once again, there were some scenes that were definitely cut. Some scenes are questionable, such as Peter's skateboarding sequence. I understand this shows that he has new abilities and his enjoyment of them, but it's still, somewhat necessary. The hipster look of the character may be Webb's way of nodding to the fusion of geek elements with hipster culture, which Justin actually pointed out to me in a recent conversation, which could potentially make the film a little dated. Still, time will only tell there. It also does rush the origin a bit, though this is probably due to Sony knowing that most of the audience knows this stuff and wants to create a separate entity. There's also some corny things which don't really jive with the tone of the film, such as all of New York's crane operators aligning perfectly at the same time to aid Spidey. It's uplifting, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of dumb if you think about it. Overall, though, The Amazing Spider-Man is a very good film which presents a character excellently and the stories which are closer to the comics and establishes itself fairly well, adds a new storyline. And I also give it an A-.
Nice. Justin?
I considered The Amazing Spider-Man the most frustrating film in 2012 to review, and now 2 years after the fact I find myself still torn as to my overall reaction to the film. While I can forgive the decision to reboot the franchise to keep copyrights, I really can't on the decision to bring Mark Webb, very funny Hollywood in his last name, into the mix. As much as I did enjoy 500 Days of Summer, I still can't say in good conscience that the man's sophomore attempt should have been a superhero film. Although I do applaud his attempt to tell a darker Spider-Man story, all he really does in this one is give a couple subtle hints of something bigger to come in what he hopes will be in multiple sequels. Which brings me to one of my bigger issues with the film. Neither of the leads really seems to fit the part. Stacy, who's an incredibly intelligent character in the comics, is rather goofy and awkward in this, and Garfield, in contrast of Maguire's more realistic Parker, reduces him to being an angsty nerd, trying to fit in but often getting into childish antics that would make High School Musical, particularly with one particular basketball stunt and the notorious skateboarding scene, proud. That said, when the two are together, there is some pretty remarkable chemistry, which is no surprise given the last film from the director. Though I do have my gripes with this movie, and believe me when I say that Joe and I have devoted hours that would probably accumulate to a week's time on this debacle. After 3 separate viewings, I always leave with the feeling that I saw a film with promising franchise material, and I leave it with a C+.
Alright. The bulk of this back and forth will be between Joe and you, because Joe obviously has a much stronger grasp on the comic book and the history of Spider-Man. But I'm sorry, Emma Stone is so good in this movie. I don't think that there's anything wrong with her portrayal of Gwen Stacy or her character. And the whole basketball thing, I know you had a problem with Peter Parker playing around as he's learning his powers, with the basketball and the bullies and stuff. That is exactly how a teenage boy who's been bullied would react. So I don't know why you have such a problem with those types of scenes in this movie.
Because it basically reduces him to being a cartoon character. It never really flows. Like, for example, Spider-Man 1, the original Raimi film. He fights Flash. There's not some goofy little, catch the basketball, Flash. Oh, no, can't get it.
How do you think a 16-year-old kid would react?
Knock his lights out?
Depends on the kid.
Depends on the kid.
Depends on the kid, but when you know you have powers and are able to predict things.
But isn't it more satisfying to make Flash look like a moron in front of everybody than just beating him up? Anybody can beat him up.
Because if you remember in the first movie, people didn't react too well to that. They were actually more afraid of him.
They didn't. That gave Peter Parker a stronger dramatic element. Obviously, hitting home with great power comes great responsibility. Instead of, let's have really cheesy basketball
Justin,
scene.
If I may interject a little bit.
Go for it.
Just want to say, you're not wrong in your statement about the first movie, you're right. But you could argue that would even hit home more if you were abusing your power, as opposed to just lashing out.
And contrast reducing it to overall quirkiness?
Well, Mark Webb is kind of a quirky guy, is he not?
It's hard to say after 2 movies.
3.
And that's correct, 3.
Well, I find it hard to believe that you don't think that Emma Stone was good in this movie either. And by the way, one of your statements was incorrect. Gwen Stacy was never portrayed as a smart character. She's ditzy.
I don't know. Scientist for the competitor to Peter, as far as I can tell from every single interpretation I've seen circa 1960.
She was not really a scientist. No, she was kind of a ditzy character, a party girl. If she was a scientist, it was a name only. This honestly was the most well-rounded I've ever seen.
You want me to pull up archive clips?
Archive, if you want to, man. Really, I've read the comics too. I've actually read them. I don't know if I've looked at Wikipedia articles or whatever you did, but
I traced the history pretty far, man. Look, I wasn't able to find the quote I wanted to, but
Justin, I'll just say this much: in the original characters, the ones that were written by Stan Lee, okay,
that's right.
I've read them all.
Okay,
I trust you. From the 60s and 70s, the ones that this character is most heavily based on. I'll admit, if you're talking about Ultimate version, she's different there. There are other versions.
That's fair. I think one of the interpretations I was looking at was from the Ultimates.
There are different versions.
Okay.
Let's not get too off track on this.
That's fair.
The primary version, which is, I believe, the one she's mostly based on, they're expanding more on that character by actually giving her something to do.
Okay.
They actually make her a more well-rounded character. Gwen Stacy is kind of known as sort of a Mary Sue. She was just this great, perfect girl who, when she dies, oh no, and then ended with Mary Jane.
Right.
It was more interesting. Gwen Stacy's a bland character generally. Not every version, but this one's one of the best ones I've ever seen, and I think Emma Stone did a great job with that. Don't get that.
Well, there's only been 2 interpretations, and one was in Spider-Man 3, so take that how you will.
Incorrect. There are other versions in different comics, and there's also a Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon, which does her very differently.
That's fair.
Which is actually my favorite version, and they actually make her into a nerd in that one. Oh, Matthew would make sense. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just saying, there are many versions, and this wasn't even my favorite, but I still think she did a good job. All right. You obviously have different feelings about it. But
okay.
She did fine, all right? Andrew Garfield, though, acting like an angsty teenager, that is who Spider-Man is in the beginning. He's an angsty person. Even when he grows up, he's angsty, and he's always making mistakes. So, giving the character a hard time for doing things that are incorrect.
I don't know. I mean, even when I read some of the earlier stuff, never seemed that angsty. Yes, did he have drama? Yeah, what teenage kid doesn't? But there's a difference between drama and angst.
Justin. Spider-Man is traditionally known as an angsty character. Every other comic, he's moaning about how horrible his life is and how everything is his fault. And he lashes out at people all the time. And he bounces back with that through his humor, which is what the character did in this movie. So whether or not you liked it or not, this is closer to the version than Sam Raimi's.
Can I point something out, though?
Please.
Regardless of how Peter is in the comics and how he's portrayed in the movies, I do have an issue with Justin. You always claim what a jerk he is in this movie, and regardless of how he's portrayed, correctly or incorrectly from his comic book persona, he is typically not a jerk in this movie. There's a couple of scenes where he's, a little too snarky. Maybe the parking lot scene obviously is famous for that, but
stealing the ID
isn't. I'm sorry?
Stealing the ID.
That's not jerky. That's sneaky, maybe.
I don't know. Got a guy thrown out of Oscorp the hard way. I'd consider that kind of jerky.
That's sneaky and trying to get around the system, but that's not him being a jerk.
He stole someone's ID. How is that not jerky?
He wasn't going out of his way to ruin this guy's day. I mean, obviously...
Just doing it for selfish gain.
The point is, look at it this way, Justin. If you really have a problem with that scene, it was an inconvenience to that guy. Eventually, they're going to be able to find out somebody stole my ID. Oh, you can actually intern here now. Eventually, it can be corrected. Though right. Osborn is kind of an evil corporation, so...
Well, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wouldn't put much stock in that.
They're all kind of doomed for, working there anyway, so,
right.
Questionable.
For lack of a better word, but yes.
Fine, he's a jerk for stealing the guy's ID. Okay.
What happened was kind of bad, sure.
In the scene where he saves the kid's life from the car... You contend that he is a jerk in that scene, and I'm not getting it.
When it's the anti-jerk scene.
Yeah, it's maybe the nicest scene of the whole movie.
Your counterpoints, both of yours for that matter, in regards to, unmask yourself, show that you're just a regular guy with web shooters, I guess, are legit. I'll grant you that. I'm not quite sure why giving him the mask to put on would help him. I would figure it would make it even harder for him to breathe.
You like highbrow stuff, Justin. I mean, the metaphor shouldn't be too lost onto you.
Anybody can be Spider-Man? Yes,
Anybody can be a hero, Justin. Don't take it too literally. So you really do think this character is like a bad person in this movie? Basically, I get that general impression. You don't like this character. You don't think that he's a good person, but I've seen real evidence within the film that he sticks up for people. I often bring up that scene where he tries to help the kid from getting bullied. He stops him from getting bullied and takes a bit of a beating for it. That's not a bad thing. He's not a bad person. Yeah, he's got uneven emotions, but because he's a teenager, he's angry. If you don't use the word angsty,
I mean, the overall performance as a whole isn't even. Admittedly, Garfield has gotten a lot better with the general role.
See, I don't really think that the performance was that much different in the second movie. I mean, the character's grown up a little bit, but you'd hope so.
Yeah, I'd say the second movie was more focused in that general area. First movie bothers me because there's so many scenes where it basically feels like you're watching an indie version of Spider-Man. The scene where he's running around in his original concept costume, which is beyond bizarre. You argue it's more...
It is.
It flows better than the first movie.
I never said that. What do you mean? Whoa.
With the wrestling scene, you mean?
Yeah.
You know, I'm fine with both of them. I would argue that this one's a little more subtle, but since, once again, we saw a whole movie where he actually was doing the wrestling, which I'm cool with, why would we want to do it again?
No, and I'm not saying he should go back and they should do that scene
No,
over again.
don't get me wrong. I think it's fine. It's corny in Sam Raimi's version, but, you know, I get it either
the original
way.
costume was kind of corny too, but I digress.
Well, they're both corny. It's fine.
Then we have the whole high school bit, which is okay. I mean, I've seen many a boy, never seen anybody get their face shoved in a lunch tray. I'm not quite sure where they were going with that. It's like, okay, nice to know that the writers haven't been in high school for a good 20, 30 years.
Well, that's a problem in general. Though I do think Flash was handled better in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll grant you that. Flash 2001, I guess, was a little...
Cliche.
80s.
Yeah. Your biggest problem was the portrayals. Is there anything else that really bugged you? It doesn't...
Well, like I said, I'm not really sure Webb was the right guy for the job. I'm not sure if it would be right for him to leave at this point, because he's already done 2 movies. You might as well finish what you started.
I thought he was fine, honestly. I think his direction's... I understand where you're coming from with some of the indie scenes, but correct me if I'm wrong, isn't he kind of an indie-ish director anyway?
500 Days of Summer was indie.
And that's, I guess, Justin's point in him not being right for the job.
Yes, you had a big problem with him diverting, but, I mean, you know... Sometimes they see a rising director, they say, you were good at this, let's see if you can do this. So there have been plenty of other directors that go one direction, go a different direction, and it's no big problem.
And some people can do that. And I have zero issue with somebody taking on a bigger project that's out of their element. And I'm all for Mark Webb taking on a variety of different projects. Honestly, I wish after a couple Spider-Man movies he would consider that. I'm assuming he's not going to do all 6.
He's planning on doing a couple more, but yeah, I think he'll hopefully let it go into the ring to somebody else.
Honestly, though, other than definitely the scene where he's the skateboarding thing and the I don't even know where he was, a warehouse or something, empty barn, I don't know,
condemned building.
Condemned building. Other than that, what was so indie to you about this movie?
I don't know, quirky, awkward humor.
Spider-Man,
but that's the character.
Yeah, but like
Spider-Man.
Oh look, this is kind of awkward. Will you go out with me? Sure. Yeah. Weird kind of Peter's proud moment.
He would have been. I mean, I would be proud of.
Hey, look!
I like Emma Stone from afar, and she agreed to go out with me.
I mean, come on, you know what that's like, right?
No, I get it.
I'm just saying, like, it's not a completely unbelievable reaction,
Yeah.
It's like the guy's like, yes, I did it. I talked to the girl that I liked. Because I feel like I'm not in the element there, It's not that ridiculous.
I mean, I think you have to keep in mind he is a teenager.
I think
a lot of your
forget.
problems with the portrayal or the movie stem from that. He's not Superman or Batman, who are already men. I mean, Superman obviously grew up, but I mean, he's a kid essentially.
I get that. I'm with that, but there's a point where angst just becomes way too melodramatic, and it detracts from the overall story.
I really think it's only a couple of scenes in this movie, though.
When a lot of the promo stuff was coming out, there was many a critic that was arguing it basically looks like if Spider-Man was a chick flick. And
is that necessarily accurate or even a bad thing?
Accurate, maybe. I mean, the fight scenes I thought were ridiculously short in this movie.
I thought they were effective. They're close-knit. I mean, look, I'll admit, it's not as larger than life as Sam Raimi's version, but they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be grittier and down-to-earth and, quote, air quote here, realistic. But that's what they're going for. That's why I think it fits. I mean, would you like if they were completely the same as Raimi's, where it's, like, big and it's obviously CGI all over the place?
Which brings me back to that whole, the indie thing. He's trying to tell a gritty story, but he's trying to tell it in this kind of, indie environment. He's still very much in 500 Days of Summer mode. You guys may have noted when I did my Amazing Spider-Man 2 review, I basically said a lot of this feels like we're watching the Amazing 500 Days of Gwen. In a lot of ways, that's sort of what it felt like.
And
honestly,
I didn't really agree with that
Justin,
statement.
If you think the romance is the strongest part, it is. But
I was gonna say,
but you don't like either the characters or their actors apparently. So I don't really understand how you like the romance either. I mean, so
that's a good point. Yes, I think both characters are flawed, but when they do come together, they do have really good chemistry.
Like people.
like people. Separately?
Like
Not so
real world people.
I mean,
Relationships, man.
yes, some of the outside quirks with the characters, but the chemistry they have together, pretty good. I just wish the rest of the movie was as good as that, even though the kiss scene is still a total ripoff of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But
Could be an homage. To be perfectly honest, I didn't pick up on it, but I think that you might be nitpicking these movies a little bit. And I mean, we had a discussion a little while ago, which I think I should bring up.
Sure.
Because
about his attachment to the Raimi film.
Yes, and you really solidified this for me, Justin, when you said that one of your favorite scenes was the really dumb one. Not saying that you liked it because it was dumb, but it was very cheesy. It's very uplifting, which is more akin to the overall tone of the Sam Raimi ones. And I believe you admitted that you had a little bit of bias with this one because you really do hold those movies in high esteem.
that's a good point. I should have brought that up in my review. I'll grant you that one, Joe.
Because I do think that's a little bit of a factor.
I do prefer the Sam Raimi movies. I mean, Spider-Man 2 is a mighty hard act to follow. And I believe even you mentioned, Dan, this one doesn't quite match up to it.
No, it doesn't, but I mean, it comes pretty close. I mean, I gave that one an A, this one's an A-. I think the second film in this series is worse than the first. You like the second one a little bit better than this one. So obviously there's something there, because Joe and I both think this one is better.
And I like them about the same.
I think the direction is better. I mean, I think Webb's getting more of a footing for what he wants to say with these movies.
Yeah.
And that shows more in the second one than this one, but I don't think the second one is as good a film.
I think one thing that really holds the first one back is that it has to do the origin again and reestablish it. You know, and when it really just wants to start off with the Sinister Six,
right.
which is what everybody wants, but you have to spend a good half an hour, 45 minutes to hold it back, which is why, once again, why things are rushed, which I think might be one reason why some people have issues with it.
Well, you also mentioned another issue I have with it in your review, Joe, which is the fact that the first Spider-Man movie, very standalone story. You could begin there, stop there. Second movie, one little kind of like, hey, if we want to do another movie, here's a way to go. That's really about it. This movie, dark conspiracy theory, we're barely touching on it. But hey, if this makes money, you'll see it in Spider-Man 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Sinister Six, and Venom. So
I think that's a good point. It's a valid point. And I admit that's a little bit of a flaw. However, Raimi wasn't trying to do that. They were actually trying to build up a big comic book-like storyline.
And I'm okay with that, but you're making a movie. If you get a sequel, that's fantastic. But you need to still tell a standalone story. Because unless you're making, I don't know, Harry Potter, you don't know if you're getting a sequel. And I mean, that's basically what happened to Green Lantern.
Well, to be fair, I think this movie told enough of a standalone story for the most part. There were definitely some things that were loose ends. But I think the Lizard in of itself...
Not too many, though.
Yeah, I mean, there
a few.
There were hints of things.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't think it's, was really, really, pushing for a sequel.
I don't think it detracts from the enjoyment of the movie at all.
Not really. I mean, but I will say this much. One reason why they're not super worried about sequels is because Sony's in league with Marvel, and they're trying to do what Avengers did. And Avengers pretty much guarantees sequels, and yes, I'll admit, it's not the same writers and people behind it, but they know Marvel, they know Spider-Man, they know people are going to see more movies.
Right. That's true, even though there have been a couple of examples of that not being the case, such as Ghost Rider.
But that's a whole other level, and Blade got 3 movies.
And Ghost Rider got 2.
One way later.
Still happened.
Still happened. I'm not denying that.
And that was terrible. So, once again, superheroes, bring people, even these days.
Iron Man, the one that started the whole spiel, post-credit sequence excluded, standalone story.
Yeah. The way I look at everything is I do try to consider everything that's part of the film as one film, and that's basically saying, woo, franchise. You like this movie, you'll see more. It still was, the main venue for that, the Kickstarter, the cornerstone for it.
I mean, I don't fault them for trying to go toe-to-toe with Disney, but I mean, at the same time, not everything is meant to be a franchise. You're seeing that now with DC, where they're making the not Justice League movie.
Well, that's a different mess entirely.
That's a whole different monster.
We're going to wrap it there, and we have a couple more movies to get to. Obviously, some differing opinions on The Amazing Spider-Man. And that's where I cut the discussion off for time, but like I said in the intro of the minisode, I think we could have easily gone another 20-25 minutes with this movie. We hope you've enjoyed the Minisode, and we will be back in just a couple days with an all-new episode of Film Fanatics, including reviews of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Snowpiercer, and Begin Again. If you haven't subscribed yet to our Facebook channel, go ahead and do that. You can, of course, check out our weekly 5-word reviews on the Facebook group and join up there if you haven't done that. And that's Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And the Twitter, always up and running, at Film Fanatics Pod. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in just a couple days with an all-new Film Fanatics. Bye!